The lead producer of Anthem has just left BioWare, and this has all happened as the Cataclysm feature came out and really was a bit of a dud, and when we saw EA barely mention Anthem at all, and not really mention it in its own right during their earnings call. This was supposed to be their big next 10-year franchise, and right now it's in a gloomy position indeed. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So, Anthem, EA's big 10-year franchise up there to rival with Destiny, didn't really go too well, did it? And now we've just found out that Ben Irving has left the company, and this means there's quite a lot to talk about because there are also past stories, such as the Cataclysm coming out and being a bit of a dud, and also EA barely mentioning Anthem at all during their earnings call, and indeed the mentions that they made of Anthem being kind of interesting. And then of course that can all be contrasted with a success story. No Man's Sky Beyond, of course, being, I think, critically very well regarded by this stage, but of course, that being a game that launched in a terrible state that really quite rightly did rile people up. So to explain the situation with Ben Irving leaving, we essentially need to go over the development of Anthem. Now, as you know, it was maybe a 5-year process that really involved a lot of prototyping, a lot of time essentially being wasted, going in no direction fast, until they essentially got a solid vision for the game, at least a shippable version of the game, and then Mark Dara came in to lead the final production. And that led to a pretty extreme period of crunch, where they finally pulled together the Anthem that actually did release. Now, it's not a good game, the Anthem that did release. What I will say is it seems like quite the miracle that they were even able to get that out. Now, the whole way that this development process worked was between two studios, BioWare Austin and BioWare Edmonton, with BioWare Edmonton, the original BioWare studio, leading the game's development. Of course, it's starting years and years ago under the name Project Dylan, because it was supposed to be the Bob Dylan of video games. Quite a hubristic statement. Now, what happened with the launch of Anthem is that things shifted. BioWare Edmonton would no longer be the lead studio. BioWare Austin would be. Now, BioWare Austin would be a natural choice for that. They do have experience running a live game, of course, with Star Wars The Old Republic being, their big project for a very long time. And this is where Ben Irving came in, with him having a leadership role on the expansions for Star Wars The Old Republic. He had worked for the company for 8 years, and yeah, he was the lead producer for Anthem in its post-launch cycle. Now, of course, the post-launch cycle of Anthem has been really quite a disaster. So when you see Ben Irving leave the company, you've got to wonder, is this rats jumping off a sinking ship? What's actually going on here? Well, he did issue a 3-part Twitter statement, and it basically said that a very exciting opportunity came up and that he went for that. And there's a few different reads on this situation. Number one, it's very hard to believe the morale is good at that studio. I think that much is fairly obvious. There's just about no good news, and of course we have the Cataclysm situation, which I think is worth bringing up. So Cataclysms were a major tentpole feature. They were essentially billed as being like the big seasons of this game, something that would really hype people up and really would be a pillar of the end game. Now, the Cataclysms were pushed back after launch, beyond where the initial roadmap sort of said they would be. Of course, the initial roadmap pretty much was flung out the window, which likely was the right decision to make because, being honest, it probably wouldn't have been that good anyway. Now, the Cataclysms enter the public test server in June, and they just recently came out. And they really did not come out to that much fanfare whatsoever. I mean, it was basically just a new game mode that you could play in Anthem, but essentially all of the regular problems of Anthem still were there. Now, that's not to say they did not make good fixes. Things, say, like luck, I think they called it. They made good changes there, but fundamentally, it still was Anthem. It still had the problems of Anthem, and it was not massively well received. And that means that morale at the studio is going to be, we assume, pretty darn low, unless something kind of exciting is happening, unless something No Man's Sky-like is happening, and we just have not heard about it. So Ben Irving is in this situation where he's leading this team. Things are not particularly going great. I would assume that the man got headhunted by another studio, and that is essentially why he is going over. He probably got a very good competitive offer, and seeing his current situation and seeing the promise of whatever new offer he was going to go into, he probably chose to go to that. And that is a very rational and sensible decision. Because regarding Anthem, he's going to look at his roadmap and think, well, yeah, this is probably going to go pretty well. But if this new company, this new opportunity that he has, if that is a new project, that has new prospects, I can really see that being an alluring option for him personally, which somewhat does remove it from the situation regarding Anthem's critical reception, because right now, we don't really know what way that could go. Obviously, critically, it's been panned so far, but this is where I want to bring in No Man's Sky. So, No Man's Sky launched, and it was essentially a massive disaster. I was very critical of that game's launch. However, what did they do? Well, they didn't really talk that much. They got to work and they just made content and made systems. They released those new content, the new systems as a part of updates. They did that relatively consistently and they did it for free. There has been zero further monetization for No Man's Sky since its launch. And of course, this is all culminated with No Man's Sky Beyond. Now, No Man's Sky is still by no means a perfect game, but when you look at its, at its stuff on Steam, its Steam reviews, you see that trending upwards significantly. And that does show that, yeah, Sean Murray got carried away with, if we're going to be charitable, he got carried away with himself during the initial launch hyping and the interviews to the point where he did pretty much just outright lie. And that obviously, there's significant problems with how he handled himself there. He has since said that he regrets how he did that, but we can't really forget that that did happen. But what we can see is that game turning itself around. And they didn't do that through big statements. They did that through actions. Now, this is where things tie back into the Anthem situation. So, what happened? They launched the game, it got critically panned, they had their roadmap, they missed their deadlines, they threw the roadmap away, they still committed to shipping the Cataclysms. The Cataclysms have came out, and people are still like, it's not really a great feature. So, they've been pretty silent. We don't really know, actually, we do not know whatsoever at all what is going to happen for the future of Anthem. And this can really mean a few different things. So EA barely mentioned it in their earnings call, and that's led to a lot of people thinking, if EA mentioned it in their earnings call and said that there's something exciting going on, but it's a little bit further off, then maybe that would indicate they're committing a lot of resources to, Anthem version 2 being a massive update for Anthem. But since there's been essentially radio silence from EA's earnings call, that's going to have a lot of people thinking, right, they may have just scuttled the project. Now, before that earnings call, EA consistently had said that they are committing to this franchise for multiple years. Now, if we're to take EA at their word there, what could that possibly mean? Well, in an ideal world, it would be a No Man's Sky-like situation where that team at BioWare Austin is basically working on the version 2 of Anthem. And version 2 of a game coming as an update, that doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened before. A really good example of this is Diablo 3. So, Diablo 3 had significant issues. Of course, the auction house ruining the game's economy and essentially ruining its loot system. Now, this all ended up fixing itself in Loot 2.0. This was a massive update for Diablo 3 that even before the Reaper of Souls expansion came out, essentially righted most of the wrongs and was a massive step forward for that game. Now, sure, right now it's no Path of Exile, but it undoubtedly was a very good thing. I think the issues with Diablo 3's continued success really just fall on Blizzard not supporting it enough. Of course, we did hear that they cancelled the second expansion, which is very sad to hear indeed, because it probably would have been very good considering how good Reaper of Souls was. But essentially something like that is what BioWare have to do for Anthem. And if they're going to do that successfully, it likely is a case of batten down the hatches, let Anthem die for 6 months, and then they would have to reveal an update that truly would make Anthem good. Now, here's the big problem. No Man's Sky is a deeply systemic game, so Hello Games, they were able to tweak those systems, change things. Yes, it was a lot of work, but No Man's Sky being a sandbox with rules, I think it was a lot more easy for them to, to make impactful updates. With Anthem, that's really quite different. Because here's the thing, the only part of Anthem that's good is the feeling of doing stuff in your javelin. When you look at the enemies in Anthem, I would actually say that they're worse than Mass Effect Andromeda's. I actually think Mass Effect Andromeda had far superior combat to Anthem, and a lot of that's because you couldn't fly everywhere, and the enemies were a little bit more diverse. Now, that's going to be a big issue, because if they're redesigning the enemies, there's a lot of systems they will not have in place. That would be a pretty gargantuan task, and it's sort of hard to see how they would redesign their enemies and really just their core combat loop without fundamentally remaking elements of the game. Because really, that's, the flying about in your javelin and that fantasy, that's the only thing they've nailed. The world is a pretty large weakness. Their loot system is another massive weakness, but by being such a systemic thing, like with Blizzard Entertainment and Diablo 3 Loot 2.0, it is possible to salvage their loot situation. And then in terms of content, this is the tricky thing. Anthem was structured to be a really, really big AAA game, and if you're doing anything in a really big AAA game, it's going to be expensive as hell, because they're not doing the smart indie thing of having the systems create the content by modifying modifying the player experience and having the player really create a lot of the content. In this, it's just flat out, if they want you to have more content, they've got to make more content. And that's really the issue. Making content for Anthem seems to have been a massive sticking point throughout the game's development. We know that Frostbite really caused a lot of problems for them, and when you actually play Anthem, what you really see is a tiny, tiny amount of content just repeated, copy-pasted across different areas in the game. So all of this does not have me filled with that much hope for if they're actually able to do this. I would almost wish that they would just say, listen, don't even think about Anthem for the next year. We're basically making Anthem 2 as a free update, and that's how we're going to salvage our 10-year plan. But of course, we all have an inbuilt cynicism, right, towards the short-term goals of a group like EA. And you really have to wonder, will they even bother doing that? Because if you look at everything else, FIFA Ultimate Team doing pretty well, Apex Legends, in spite of its recent issues, doing pretty well. They have led to EA having a pretty good earnings call with their most recent one. And you've got to wonder, is fixing Anthem and really making Anthem 2 and having that work, is that a really expensive way to make a bunch of money when they could make the same amount of money or even more by doing something more cost efficient? And ultimately, I do suspect that's where they're going to end up going with this. Now, on the topic of Anthem's mentions in the most recent earnings report, I think it is just worth bringing that up for full context. So, in the most recent earnings call, Anthem had 2 mentions. Now, one of those mentions basically meant nothing. It was them saying that they still are working on new intellectual property like Anthem. Now, they didn't mean like they're working on games like Anthem, they just mean, new IP, because of course Anthem was a new IP project. Now, the other usage of Anthem, again, was not really about Anthem the game. It was about how Anthem was basically a big push towards digital. Now, of course, Anthem pushed towards digital extremely, extremely hard. Of course, Origin Access got the earliest access, you had all of that stuff going on, and of course, we've covered many times before how digital just has the higher revenue split, especially if it's being sold on your own store. So essentially, Anthem, it was mentioned in that earnings call, but really in no way pertaining to the game itself. And I think the big issue here is you look at what No Man's Sky did, and you look at how they fixed it, and it's a good story. They could have taken the money and ran. There's just so many factors that do make it different, though. They were a small studio, and I think once we checked their company's house records, they had 60-something million cash in the bank account because it had done really well. And they could have ran away with that cash, but clearly what they decided to do was look at that big pile of cash and think, okay, we have enough money, we have the freedom to fix this. And then they just went and fixed it. And that's obviously been a very viable business model because in fixing the game, they're regaining audience and they're leading to new sales. And I imagine that's created a strong internal success story for the company, especially because, if it's a band of 25 merry rogues who are, doing well, that's going to be a high morale situation. People are going to feel driven and passionate to work in that game. Now, if you're in the Anthem situation, it's going to be pretty different. You're not going to have that freedom. Because if you're a 25-person company with 60, 70 odd million in the bank account, yeah, you have a free check to do whatever the hell you want. That is not the situation that BioWare Austin are going to be in, and I doubt they're going to have that really positive internal story of a success story for their game. And also, Anthem was sold on the promise of its live service. I think it was very clear to most people that their $60 was not just purchasing Anthem, the product that they got. I think it was also buying into Anthem, the years-long experience. EA really did sell the future content as being a part of the Anthem package. Now, abandoning that content, I think there's almost more of a sort of a moral issue there with how EA have done that than with the No Man's Sky situation, which is pretty much just, hey, we released the game and it was really hyped up, but it actually wasn't that good. Whoops. Whereas with this, they try to really sell you, they really just tried to upsell that entire experience and, yeah, really failed with it. So there you go. Where are we left with Anthem? overall, there's a part of me that hopes, there's a part of me that thinks that it is possible to have a No Man's Sky-like situation. However, I think if you compare Anthem to Destiny 1 on launch, or Destiny 2 on launch, or The Division 1 on launch, I think Anthem's actually in a far worse state than any of those games. And I don't have that much hope, basically because I think the amount of money that it would cost to get Anthem in a better state, I think EA are going to crunch the numbers, and they're going to realize, you know what, I think we should just make a new thing instead. And I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to end up going. But there you go, that is the Anthem update. That's what's been going on with Anthem, the Ben Irving situation, what that really means. And I thought it was just important not to say, Ben Irving is left, the whole game is dead. More just to explain why Ben Irving probably left, and for somebody in his position, what will the emotional push and pull of that be? You know, what will pull them in the different directions? Which in this case, yeah, there's a personal story there that even if Anthem was going in a really good direction internally, he could just have a more exciting opportunity elsewhere. So, there you go. Let me know what you think about Anthem, and I think what I most want to know is, how do you think it could be saved? What is the update that would bring you back to Anthem? What would actually make you excited about that IP again? Let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and with that, I'll see you next time.